Today we're talking about inflation, and more specifically, the little word games played by the people who break your dollar, rob your savings, crush your grocery budget, and then show up on television acting like the whole thing is some mysterious weather pattern that they can't figure out. And now we all know this routine by now if we've been alive for longer than 18 years. When prices go up, politicians on the left, they blame the evil corporations. Gas prices go up. Everyone wants to blame foreign conflicts. Oh, Ukraine and Russia, Iran. Grocery prices go up. They want to blame supply chain. Oh, eggs are so expensive because egg-laying chickens take longer than meat chickens. Rent goes up. They want to blame greedy landlords, slumlords, and not realizing regulations suck. Healthcare goes up. They blame markets that barely exist anymore. No free markets in healthcare. And when all else fails, they blame you and they also blame me. You made too much money. You bought too many things. You had the nerve to want eggs, beef, gasoline, electricity, and maybe, just maybe, a roof over your head. But here's this dirty little secret. Inflation, in the old and more honest meaning, which in politics is a taboo, did not originally mean prices going up. Inflation meant inflating the money supply. Rome did it, Persia did it, everyone's done it. It meant creating more units of money, more paper claims, and more digits in your bank accounts, more liquidity chasing the same pool of goods and services in the stock market. And when you increase the supply of money faster than the economy increases the supply of real things, that money becomes worth less. It's not magic, it's not hocus pocus, it's not a mystery, and that is not some academic puzzle that requires 1,000 PhD economists, 100 models, and one smug central banker with a microphone. And that is the oldest con in monetary history. And this is all going to be about monetary policy. Print the money first, spend it first, hand it to insiders first, and let ordinary people discover the damage later at the grocery store. That is inflation, increasing the money supply that is chasing the same amount of goods. Now, the Mises Wire article that I'm going to link in the description that we're going to be talking about today focuses on Kevin Warsh, the new Fed chair, and his interest in using core or trimmed inflation indexes to guide monetary policy. In plain English, they mean the Fed may increasingly focus on inflation numbers that strip out the loudest, ugliest, and most painful price increases. Food is too volatile. Well, we'll yank that right out. Energy is too messy, too many conflicts. We'll just pull that right out. The prices spike too fast. Trim the extremes on the outside so we get the center. Congratulations. Your pain has been statistically removed and you are none the wiser. You still pay the bill, but the spreadsheet looks a lot cleaner. Inflation is down to 2.3%. Yeah, no, that is the problem. Because once inflation gets redefined from they inflated the money supply into some careful curated averages of selected prices move in a way approved by central bank math priests. And those are the priests you need to worry about. The public loses the plot at this point. And that is exactly how this scam that's been going on since 1913 survives to this day. And people are too stupid to see the scam. The official conversation becomes, which price indexes should we use? And there are several. One of the top ones is headline PCI, Consumer Price Index. Core CPI, Consumer Price Index. PCE, Core PCE. Now, you may be wondering what all these are, and it's a valid question. And now we have trimmed. And what does that mean? That means they cut out a lot more stuff. Then you have median CPI. These are all some magical numbers that exclude everything people actually need to live. The politicians are not on your side on any side of the political spectrum. But here's the thing, the real question should be much simpler. Who created the money? Who got it first? And who paid the price later? Those are the only three questions that we need to ask. And these are the questions that the establishment does not want to be asked of them because they don't have an answer. And if they do have an answer, it's a lie. Because if inflation is just a general rise in prices, then everyone can blame everyone. You can blame corporations. You can blame unions. You can blame workers. You can blame the consumer for demanding more. But see, that doesn't matter. You also can blame the oil markets as well. That's another thing we can do. Foreign wars, another one that they love to use. Pandemics. If you know, you know. And the weather, we have a drought. The price of corn has gone through the roof. Bird flu killed a bunch of chickens. And of course, the same great one, greed. That is not a real thing. Oh, and we also can't forget for you lefties, the vibes. But if inflation is understood as monetary expansion, then suddenly the spotlight points straight at the central banks, the banking system, and the political class that loves cheap debt, deficit spending, and emergency money creation. That is why the definition changed. Look at unemployment. There are several different definitions for unemployment. It's not because the new definition is clearer, because the old definition was too dangerous because it exposed the shell game. Milton Friedman famously said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And whether you agree with every part of Friedman's economics or not, that line cuts through the propaganda like a chainsaw through butter. Because sustained economy-wide price inflation does not happen without the money side of the equation. It is not a one-sided equation here. A supply shock can make oil more expensive over the short term. A drought can make food prices more expensive. Wars can make energy more expensive. A regulation can make housing more expensive. Look at New York, San Francisco, Seattle, LA. But if the money supply is not expanding, people have to cut back somewhere else. Higher prices in one place force lower demand in others. And that is not painless, but it is different from a general erosion of the currency. To get broad, lasting price increases across the economy, you need the monetary unit itself to be weakened. And that's what they do when they print more money. The money machine go brrr. You need more money chasing goods, services, assets, and, of course, political promise. And this is where the M2 money supply matters. You'll never hear the Fed talk about this or the news talk about this. The report that I'm going to include, too, today makes the case that year-over-year growth in M2 is a better inflation warning signal than the consumer price index. And you might be, why, Jeff? Because CPI measures the symptom. M2 measures the pressure building inside of the system. CPI tells you the fever has finally showed up. And you're already sweating profusely. M2 tells you who injected the virus. Guess what? It's the Federal Reserve. M2 increases currency deposits and money market funds. In other words, it captures broad liquidity, the pool of spendable or near spendable money that can flow into consumer prices, housing, stocks, bonds, and everything else people bid on. And that matters because inflation does not always show up first in the grocery aisle. Inflation takes a while to trickle down. Sometimes it shows up in asset bubbles, the dot-com burst. Sometimes it shows up in housing prices running up. Sometimes it shows up in stocks, the artificial bubble, in the tech sector, chips, AI. Sometimes it shows up in tuition, healthcare, or insurance. CPI can miss it, underweigh it, smooth it, adjust it, substitute it, hedge it, trim it, or just explain it away, poof, it's gone. M2 just asks one question. How much money did they create? That is why M2 year over year growth is so powerful. It is one of the most powerful tools to determine true inflation. Why? Because it is more direct, it is more transparent, and it is harder to massage with statistical theory, which Keynesians love. And it has a history of leading inflation with a lag. The report, also that I mentioned earlier, is going to be included below, highlights the post COVID episode clearly. M2 exploded during the pandemic period. The St. Louis Fed reported that the M2 grew at record rates during the COVID period, then later declined at record rates starting in late 2022. Federal Reserve data defines M2 as the M1 plus small denomination time deposits, retail money market funds, which means it captures a broader pool of liquidity than just physical cash and checking accounts. And here's the part that should make every American absolutely furious and want to riot in the streets, but we want to riot over other things that aren't as important. The money supply surged first. Then guess what happened? Consumer prices inflated and consumer prices inflated as well after the money supply increase. The report notes that M2 year-over-year growth hit an extraordinary high around February 2021, while PCE inflation began rising in that same period and peaked in June 2022. That is about the classic 12 to 18 month long lag monetarists have talked about for decades, and we all know it is true. So, when regular people were being told inflation was transitory, everyone remember that, the monetary fire had already been lit by the Fed and the Treasury. The smoke just had not filled the room yet and made you choke. And when it finally did, the same experts who helped ignore the warning signs grabbed microphones and blamed everything except the money that they had printed. And what did they do? First thing, they blamed supply chains. Then they blamed Putin for his war in Ukraine. They blamed consumers, funny enough, which I don't know why you would blame consumers. They were the last ones to get hit with it. They blamed corporations. They called it greedflation. But here's the thing. Greedflation's not a real thing. They blamed the vibes of the economy, like, we're going to deal with something that's tangible and say it's vibes. They blamed everything but the giant monetary elephant stomping through the economy, wearing the Federal Reserve name tag by the name of Jerome Powell. Now, to be fair, not every price increase is inflation in the strict monetary sense. This is where precision matters. If a war disrupts oil shipments, energy prices can spike, as we saw last month and 2 months ago. If lockdowns destroy production and logistics, goods can become scarce. If government regulations choke housing constructions, rent naturally has to rise. If healthcare is buried under mandates, subsidies, licensing rules, and third-party payment distortions, medical costs can and will explode. Those prices increases are real. The pain is real. The government damage, guess what, is also real. But they are not always inflation in the strict sense of it. They are interventions, shortages, disruptions, and distortions in the market created by the government. The problem is that the Fed and the political class can use that distortion in the most dishonest way possible. They can say, well, food and energy are volatile, so let's just ignore them in the inflation makeup. They can say, well, the price spike is caused by war, so we'll just cut that out. We'll trim that little fat off. They can say, well, housing is complicated, so let's use owner's equivalent rent. Yeah, that's a new thing. I didn't learn about that till I looked into this. They can say, well, the index looks better if we adjust for substitutions. So let me break that adjust for substitutions down for you. Steak gets expensive, so eat hamburger. Hamburger gets expensive, so eat beans. Beans get expensive, so shut up, peasant. The model says you're just fine. This is why America should be deeply skeptical when central banks show interest in narrower inflation gauges. Because here's the thing, trimmed inflation can become a political anesthesia. It does not cure the disease at all. The only way you cure the disease is to have a solid monetary policy. It numbs the official measurement of the pain you feel in your pocketbook and when you go to the grocery store. And once the pain disappears from the index, policymakers get more room to do what they always wanted to do: create more money, support more debt, protect more insiders, and then magically call it stability. This is not fucking stability. That is a slow motion robbery with better charts. Now, let's talk about PCI. PCI is not useless. You may have thought that from hearing what I said earlier. It can tell us something about changes in a basket of consumer prices over time. But it is not reality itself. It depends on what goods are included, how they are weighed, how substitution is handled, how quality changes are measured, how housing is estimated, and how the basket is updated. Change the method, change the numbers. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just how indexes work. A price index is a construction. It is not a law of nature. And critics like John Williams, not the composer, John Williams at Shadow Stats argues that changes in official inflation methodology have tended to understate the real cost of living increases experienced by ordinary Americans. You do not have to accept every alternative estimate to understand the basic concern. When the government has massive obligations tied to inflation adjustments, and when lower official inflation makes debt, benefits, and policies look better, people have every right to be suspicious of the measurement game, especially when their lived experiences say one thing and the official numbers say another. You go to the grocery store, your bill says inflation is not under control. You renew your car insurance, your bill says inflation is not under control again. You try to buy a house, your mortgage payment says inflation is not under control. You fill up your tank. I use premium in my car. Your receipt says inflation is not under control. Then some economist on television says, actually, if you remove the things going up, inflation looks much better. See, that is not economics. That is comedy for people with tenure because Fed chairs serve for 6 years, so they don't get changed out there in presidency. The report also points to long-run evidence. Luca Benedia's European Central Bank Working Paper, Long-Run Evidence on Money Growth and Inflation, studied data across countries and long time periods and found a strong long-run relationship between money growth and inflation. The relationship can be messy in the short run because velocity changes, crises happen, and financial systems evolve. But over longer horizons, the monetary connection is hard to escape. And that is the point of this. M2 is not a perfect minute-by-minute inflation gauge. The velocity of money is not consistent. Money can sit idle. Money can sit out of the market. Banks can change their lending behavior. The economy looks a little soft, they tighten the lending requirements. People can hoard cash in crisis, sitting in money market accounts, under your mattress. Financial innovation can change how money moves. So no, M2 does not give you a flawless real-time inflation number. But it gives you something CPI does not. It looks at the underlying monetary pressure before the full price damage becomes obvious to the consumer and we all feel it. That's why the best way to use M2 is not as a replacement for every price index, but as a warning system to tell you something's wrong with the system. CPI tells you what already happened to a selected basket. Now, M2 tells you whether the monetary fuel is being pumped into the economy, and that's the question. And if M2 is growing much faster than real output of goods and services, do not act shocked when prices eventually fall, but there's always a lag. The Fed wants you staring at the thermometer. M2 tells you who started the fire. And that's the important thing. Who started the fire? It's the Federal Reserve. And here's where Warsh's interest in trimming inflation becomes so very concerning to anyone with a functioning brain. Because the issue is not just technical, it is political. Warsh was appointed to cut interest rates. If the Fed focuses on narrower and narrower measures of inflation, it can declare victory at the 2% target while Americans are still losing. It can say the policy is working while grocery bills, rent, insurance, energy, and debt payments keep crushing the little people. It can justify easier money because the trim numbers look so tame and friendly. But trim numbers do not buy you dinner. Trim numbers do not pay your rent or mortgage. Trim numbers do not fill up your gas tank when you're trying to get to work. Trim numbers do not preserve the purchasing power of your dollar. And they sure as hell do not hold the money printers accountable. No one wants to do that because everyone is drunk on easy money. And see, this is why we need to reclaim the language. Inflation is not just this, the prices went up. Inflation is the destruction of purchasing power through monetary expansion. Rising prices are the visible bruise on your body from the beating you took with a bamboo pole. Money creation is that punch in the mouth. And the people throwing the punches would really prefer you spend your time arguing about how to measure the bruises. Is this circular? Is this odd shaped? And that is the game that's being played, that you are all being played in. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people are aware of it. But that's why you subscribe to this channel, to get the real game that's being played. The game is redefine inflation. Complicate inflation to where you don't understand it anymore. Trim inflation so we get nice, smooth, round edges. Smooth inflation. Seasonally adjusted inflation. I hate that term. Blame inflation on everything except the institution that enables it. And what institution enables inflation? Why, none other than the Federal Reserve. And that's what they keep doing it over and over again. The honest framework, which was laid out here, is simpler. Watch M2 year-over-year growth. Watch real output. Watch the velocity of money, which I may do a short on the velocity of money. Watch the credit expansion that happens as we get closer to a 2% interest rate or 2% inflation. Watch asset prices, except for Friday when the market lost 1,100. Watch government deficits balloon because we're going to be paying over $1 trillion in interest next year or this year. And watch the central bank's balance sheet. Watch the runoff. And then ask one basic question. Are they creating more claims on wealth faster than society is creating actual wealth? Because actual wealth is more important than created wealth. If the answer is yes, and guess what? The bill is coming. It may not be coming today. May not be coming even this month. Maybe not in the exact category that the experts shake that little magic 8-ball and predict it. I'll tell you one thing for sure, two things for certain. It is coming. Because here's the thing, reality always collects. And ordinary Americans usually pay first after the insiders, the politicians, and connected corporations get their money. The rich get asset inflation, stock valuations go up, homes go up. The political connected class, they get cheap credit to spend on more useless services. The government gets easier borrowing. Wall Street gets a massive injection of liquidity, which it needs. And the middle class, guess what we get handed? We get handed a receipt. And that is the modern inflation policy. A wealth transfer dressed up as macroeconomic management. So, the next time someone tells you inflation is complicated, ask them this simple question. Did the money supply explode? Who benefited from new money first? Always look at who benefits first. And who paid higher prices later? Guess what? Look in the mirror for that one. And why the experts are so desperate to focus on every number except the one that shows the money creation. Because once you understand inflation is a monetary phenomenon, the whole machine looks very different. It stops looking like a policy mistake and it starts looking like a system of control. A system where politicians promise what they can't afford, central banks enable what markets would punish, and ordinary people are told to be grateful when their currency dies slowly instead of all at once. And that is the real inflation story, not the CPI headline, not the trimmed mean, not the sanitized index, not the press conference. The money tells the story. Follow the money supply, and you find the scene of the crime. I can only lead you to truth. I can't make you believe it. I will see you next Monday. Have a good day.